Can you see the PowerPoint now, Sunny? Awesome. So I'm just gonna put it on full screen. Okay, I have my screen on. I don't know if you can hear me, Sunny. I have it on full screen on my computer right now.
Yeah, it looks good.
Perfect. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for having me today. My name is Pierre Wijdenes. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founder of Neuraura. Neuraura is a company that is based in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada. And we have a mission on unlocking the brain. Really what we're doing is that we're developing electrodes for the brain that allows us to record the brain at a much higher signal quality than traditional electrodes. And that then allows us to, for example, build better implants, or it also allows us to help neurologists and neurosurgeons define with more precision which part of the brain needs to be treated, either through, let's say, resection, ablation, but also neurostimulation. Before I talk to Neuraura, I want to share with you a bit why I ended up doing what I'm doing. So when I grew up in France, as you can probably recognize from my accent. And when people think of France, they always think about, Paris, the Eiffel Tower, this romantic place. But the truth is, I was actually born in a place that looked a bit more like that. There were definitely more cows than inhabitants in France where I grew up, in the countryside. But from a very, very young age, I was always interested by engineering and how you build stuff, and especially how you can build stuff that help people. And so it is quite normal that then I decided to work more in the field of user interface and product development, engineering. And so this is where I did my school, basically, in France. Now, user experience, user interfaces, it's a field that is also quite exciting, that allows us to really understand how people connect with machines, like, for example, my phone. How do you design the interface to make sure that you can utilize the app with a lot of ease? But it goes beyond that, like the way we are talking today through Zoom. How do you make the application as seamless as possible? And I'm not saying it's easy to use. I'm just saying, like, there is work that can be done there. But you can also think about a nuclear plant, and you can think about how you control a nuclear plant. When you look at the panels, you have all these buttons. How do you interact with systems around you? And that was really my original focus during my studies in engineering back in France. Now, I was then also very much passionate about how do you cross that border? How do you cross, how do you go to the next step where you can not only maybe control your phone with your fingers, but how could you connect directly to a computer and with your thoughts control a computer? And of course, we have seen many of movies around, like you can see the Matrix here, top left, and the X-Men. There's a ton of those, right, where we fantasize the idea of controlling a system and linking our thoughts with a computer. And eventually, I think we will do progresses towards that direction, but there's a lot of research that needs to be done beforehand, and especially we need to better understand our brain, because what is between our ears basically is not very well understood. Let me tell you that. So I decided to study that, to do my PhD at the Hotchkiss Brain Institute in Calgary, again in Canada. And through there, I was able to better understand how the brain works. I was able to really study how neuron works, which are these tiny cells that connect with each other, and then allows us to move our legs, speak, think, etc. When you think that there are billions and billions of those neurons, that they are all interconnected in a certain manner in our brain, and then through our spinal cord and an entire nervous system in our body, the brain is really the headquarters, but there's still so much, as I said, that we need to understand about it. And part of it is understanding how those cells, including the neurons, are working together to make who you are. Now, at the end of my PhD, we basically developed sensors that allowed us to map the brain. And it allowed us to map the brain in specific conditions or specific clinical use cases, especially the one of epilepsy intracranial surgery. And so for that process to happen, we realized that we had these sensors we had these sensors that could help a lot of patients. And then we also realized that if we were not trying to bring those sensors out there to the market ourselves, they will never see the light of the day. And then you ask yourself, what's the point of doing all that research, doing a PhD, and doing all these things if eventually it's not to impact patients? Because until it is in market, it doesn't impact the patients. So this is how we decided to create the company Neuraura. At the end of my PhD, we joined an accelerator program, and since then had done a bunch of different type of accelerators and incubators that then helped us understand what is the strategy that we need to have in place to build around Neuraura, raising capital, dealing with the regulatory field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was about 4 or 5 years ago that we started the company. So let me tell you a bit more what we are doing. So when you think about epilepsy, it is estimated that 1 person out of 3 will have neurological conditions in a lifetime. So again, you think about epilepsy, you think about Parkinson, Alzheimer, depression, you name it, right? There are many, many neurological conditions out there. If you think about epilepsy in particular, you are talking more about 1 patient out of 20 that will have a seizure in their lifetime, and about 1 person out of 100 who will develop epilepsy. And we talk about epilepsy when there is more than 1 seizure over time. Now, for those patients, there are different solutions that exist to treat them. But one of the ones that I'm going to talk about is the one of neuromodulation, which is when you get an implant, and this implant is acting a bit like a pacemaker, but for the brain instead of for the heart. And by delivering electrical current inside the brain, you can modulate the activity, which is why it's called neuromodulation. You modulate the activity in a way that is going to try to, for example, in Parkinson's patient, you'll be able to stop the tremors. If you have patients suffering from depression, you can maybe inhibit the feeling of being depressed. And then again, of course, in epilepsy, you can try to stop the seizures. Now, these implants are here. We know many companies out there that have been making those electrodes and those implants. The bottom left here, you see some of this example. Here, it's one called NeuroPace, where you actually get the electronic that is implanted about the level of the skull. So they actually drill holes and they place this implant where the skull is. And then you have the electrode that go in different locations around the brain where they want to either record or stimulate. And then you have another device, for example, this one for Medtronic, where you have the electronic in that case that is placed around the chest. And when you have electrodes and lead that goes all the way up and then through a hole, again, a tiny hole, are inserted right in the locations where they want to stimulate. So we don't talk too much about it, but again, those implants are there and they provide tremendous hope for patients, especially when there is no other solutions for them than receiving an implant. Now, when we look at the efficacy of this implant today, because going back to that point that we don't know the brain so much, the stimulation is still quite blunt. We don't really know when to stimulate or when not to stimulate. And that's mainly because we don't know how to properly listen to the brain. The brain is telling us a lot of things, but there's so much thing it's actually telling us that we can't differentiate what's the noise and what's the signal. It's a bit like going to a hockey stadium and there's a goal happening. Everyone is standing up, jumping, shouting, yelling, and at the same time, your friend next to you is trying to tell you something. It's almost impossible to hear them at the same time. And that the same thing happened in the brain. The whole thing is telling us something, but sometimes we just want to listen to specific parts of the brain. And those specific parts are telling us specific signals, which are hard to listen to, and therefore we either stimulate the brain or we don't stimulate the right way. Now, the other thing is, I don't know if you ever saw a picture of the brain, even just on Google, but when you look at the brain, it kind of look all the same. Even though you have this extremely complex organ, when you look at it, you wouldn't be able to really know, unless you did a lot of study, figured out what is responsible for controlling my hands or controlling my legs or controlling my breathing. From the top, it just looks the same. So this is where it also becomes tricky to understand where should we actually position the electrode when you do neurostimulation in the right place. And so if you take together that blunt stimulation plus the pole placements of electrodes, we believe this is what is reducing the efficacy of this electrode or this neural implant by about 50%. So today, if you were getting to get an implant, or if you know someone will have an implant, there's a 50-50 chance it's going to work. And so as much as when it works is awesome, for the other 50%, it's not that awesome because they have to go through a surgery that, as you can imagine, is quite invasive. It's costly. And if you don't have any positive result at the end, it's kind of frustrating, obviously. To be able to solve that problem, we need better data. We need better brain data that allows us to understand what is happening in the brain, to map the patient's brain and guide the neuromodulation, meaning we need basically a map of the brain to help us understand where we put the electrodes for both recording and stimulation. And that is basically what we do at Neuraura. Neuraura is actually developing electrodes that are allowing us to record activity for either the top of the brain or in deeper tissues. And those electrodes are called intracranial electrodes. They allow us to capture the activity at a much higher resolution and really have what we call coverage of the brain. It's a bit like mapping the Earth. It's a bit like recording an earthquake. When you think about it, when you record an earthquake, what are you doing? You have data centers around the Earth, and then you have a bunch of seismometers. And these seismometers, guess what? Well, they are composed of a magnet and a coil. And when there is a vibration on the Earth, the coil has the magnet in the middle, it vibrates, and you detect a current. And when you place multiples of those magnets around, or seismometers, around the world, then you can measure how the earthquake propagates from one area to the other. This is how you study seismology. The exact same thing really happens with the brain. The electrode that we built, they capture electrical activity, the same way that those seismometers work. It's just a different type of sensors. But it's still electrical activity that we capture. And when you place multiple of those through the process of intracranial monitoring that is done already in epilepsy, then you can actually map the brain and better understand where the seizures start and where they propagate. You can understand maybe also what are the different pathways that those seizures are taking. You can also maybe understand where the seizures start and were there any biomarkers, any signals that tells that maybe the signal starts before we actually had the seizures. So in other words, could you potentially predict the seizures? We believe that some of the studies that we have done, so in large animal studies so far, in sheep actually, and we work for that with the Bionic Institute in Melbourne as well as with the Florey Institute. We believe that we have demonstrated that we can actually do that. And that brings tremendous hope because it means that we can build better implants that not only we will know exactly what is the map of the specific patient, but you could also predict some of the seizures, for example, in epilepsy. So with the data we capture, we can again analyze and do a lot of machine learning and software analytics behind that then allows us to understand what's happening in the brain and guide the neuromodulation in those different patients. Now, even though epilepsy for us is what we call the niche market, it's a place where we want to start because we see an opportunity there, because we know that there are existing patients out there that have electrode and it's an easier market for us to tap into. We believe that the same technology can then be applied into multiple other applications. And I mentioned Parkinson's disease, I mentioned depression, etc. Now, the field is also moving towards implants that go what we say below the neck. So the ones that I've been talking here are the ones that you place in your brain. But there are also tons of implants that you can put out there that also neurostimulate different parts of the body. And in that case, you will be talking about the peripheral nervous system in order to treat symptoms. You know, for example, we have implants that goes in the spine right now and that help with chronic pain. We have electrode that are also positioned in what we call the sacral nerve, which is basically in your lower back. And that allows us to also control, thanks to neurostimulation, conditions such as overactive bladder, etc. So again, neurostimulation is really a field of which brings at least to us a lot of excitement. We know it brings to patients a lot of opportunity to finally get the treatment that they need. And we really think it's kind of the early stage of what we're going to see in the world in the next 20, 30 years. Now, the last point I'm going to make, and I'm going to go back to that slide here, is that many people think about the brain-machine interface, about how we're going to be able to control, machine thanks to our thought, etc. And to an extent, I will say that over the last 10 to 20 years, we have done some massive improvement to the existing technologies, so we can finally make that one day a reality. I can tell you that we are getting there. It's going to take us more time than we think, for sure. There's a lot of steps that we need to go through, a lot of challenges that we need to solve. Are we going to be able to really merge with technology? I think I will leave that question for maybe another long discussion. But I do think that eventually, monitoring continuously our health and controlling maybe thanks to our thoughts, certain devices around us is going to be a reality. All right. I do have more slides around, quick thoughts on figuring out your journey yourself. And the reason I wanted to talk about this first, as well, is because I didn't know originally that I was going to work in the field of, brain-machine interface, neuromodulation, brain implants, etc. It's really something that grew up with me, and that's something that I ended up doing because I've always followed my passions. Now, I often think that there are two types of people in this world. There are the people that when they are 5 or 10 years old, they know exactly who they want to become. And that's great. But for the other 50%, I find often it's not the case. We don't really know what we want to do. And there are so many things that excite us, but it's hard to pick the ones that we really want to do. And I don't think there is any specific, there's no silver bullet. There's nothing that is going to be, once you answer the questions, you're going to be able to know exactly what you want to do. I think it's okay to accept that you may want to do different things in your life, and that's also very enriching. So I've put together a list of just 10 little advice that I will recommend to every student embarking on the journey and figuring out what they want to do in this world that we're living in today, where there are so many more opportunities when you think about it than people had 50 years ago, and a complete opening to new technologies. And as often, we say that the 10 most successful job in 5 years from now don't even exist. This is to tell you about, this really tells you about the pace at which the job market is evolving and how many opportunities to work in exciting fields is around there. So my first advice for you is to think big. Always think bigger. There are so many opportunities out there. There are things that people are doing, but there are things that people that are not doing. And I want you to think sometimes about what are people not doing that will be a very cool thing. We're talking about brain implant in that case. Well, think about like even 20, 30 years ago, and you would have talked to people about brain implant, like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. Well, yeah, you're crazy, but you're crazy because you think big. These days I see more and more, for example, videos and companies opening up where they actually develop these drones that you can fly with it and use kind of a new car or a new taxi for yourself. That's super cool, right? Like, this is something that's going to change the way we transport goods or we transport people. And all, again, like those thoughts were maybe around like came real maybe 10 to 20 years ago, but it's only now that we see them really much more on social media and on the TV. And I think it's because it takes time. Thinking beings require dedication, but it's still something that is very exciting. So think big and really try to reach what's not done maybe yet. Also think global. So I come from France. I did internships in Germany. I did internships in the UK. I moved to Canada to do my PhD. I then traveled to multiple conferences around the world to talk to different peers, to different researchers. Think really global, because the world is global. Even now, when you think about it, in our company, we are based in Calgary, but we work with suppliers from all around the world, and we don't have a choice. We need to do that because there are clusters of very, very good people and professionals that are in different locations around the world. And our technology is so specific and so niche that we need to work with some very specific people out there that are not always living next to us. Whatever you do in life, I think global, because you don't know where the next opportunities are. The other thing is keep learning. Like there are many entrepreneurs out there, very successful ones, that will tell you that they read about an hour every day, or that they dedicate 30 minutes to an hour a day learning something new every single day. And it doesn't have to be something boring, right? It doesn't have to be like, for people who don't like to read, for example, it doesn't have to be opening a book, opening a textbook. It can be even just like going on YouTube and looking at how to code something, something that's, looking at new technologies out there that people are publishing. It may be looking at a documentary on Netflix. It can be anything really, even joining a club and spending an hour a day just like participating in club activity that you think are making you learn something new. But again, at the rate that technology is growing, at the rate that new information is being agglomerated in this world, I think it's really important to keep yourself up to date. Now, the other thing, of course, that we talked a lot about these days is be mindful of your environment. We talk about the environment as, the plants, the nature around us, but also I think it goes beyond that. It's also, of course, the people. You don't know when the next opportunities are going to come for you. You don't know necessarily who is going to be the connection that is going to open you a job opportunity somewhere, or that is going to bring you to learn about something that is very cool and exciting. So try to always be curious and mindful of the environment you live in. The fifth point is take time to know yourself. As a rule of thumb, I always was told that nothing is impossible, and you can always try to do something to make things possible. The word itself, I am possible, impossible is the same thing, really. And it just takes time sometimes to know yourself, but it's something that is so much worth it. I know that we live in a world where sometimes we are feeling very rushed in trying to understand what we want to do, and people put pressure on us. But I think sometimes it's good to step back and to really ask yourself, what am I? What do I really want to do? What type of impact do I want to have in that world? Then question what you really want, as I mentioned. I find it's easy to know what we don't want, but it is extremely hard to know sometimes what we really want. Again, that was my case when I was a student back then. And so asking what you really want to do, asking yourself that question, is sometimes something that takes time. I highly recommend to write those ideas down, to write notes, and actually, make a list of all the things that you want, and actually figure out, okay, do I really want these things? Do I really want these things? Revisit them on a regular basis, and if they don't stick to your head, it's probably not something you actually really want to do. And then when you have ideas, pick them and try them. If you want to go into software development, let's say, well, what about joining a coding club? What about going on YouTube and finding some of those apps and learning to code by yourself, or pushing the next level and adding some libraries into this, etc. See if it's really something that provides joy to you when you do it. And it can be really anything, right? You can also be an entrepreneurial idea. You may have an idea about a business which is, let's say, around, I don't know, walking dogs and helping people find jobs, and they are excited about going in and working with dog owners to walk the dogs in the streets. Try that, figure it out by yourself. What does it imply to actually develop a business, to code an app, and how do you connect customers with your app as well? There's a lot of learning you're going to have. But sometimes when you go through that learning, you're going to fail, and that's okay. Edison, everyone knows the story. I think that it was at the bulb number 10,000. That is how the story goes, that he finally allowed us to have bulbs, and we are using those bulbs every day now to have light in our houses. It takes often a lot of failure before there is success. Unfortunately, I think we live in a world where we always talk about the successes. We don't really talk often about the failures. That's kind of unfortunate, I think, because there are a lot of learnings in those failures. And I think certain failures needs to be celebrated. For sure, if you never try anything, you're never going to fail. And I think that's also worse. Now, you also need help often. And that's actually a pretty cool thing. One of the things that I love about my work is actually how often I get to meet some exciting people, some people that are really changing the world, that have making an amazing impact, and that inspire me. At the end of the day, we are doing what we are doing because we are passionate about helping people, but it's also because we work with amazing people around us, an amazing community, advisors, doctors, etc., that help us make sense of all the things that we're doing. And when you see a mountain in front of you and you see all the tasks that you have to achieve, but you know that you have people that can work with you, help you, and that are also excited to do that journey with you, it goes a very, very long way. So never be afraid of asking for help. I will say it's the same thing when you ask questions. They say that if you never ask questions, you're gonna learn anything. Obviously, it's gonna be very hard to actually get curious and learn these next things. When you get older, you tend to think that if you don't ask questions, you're actually the one behind. And then the last thing is network. I think people say that we are 6 connections away, or 5 now, I can't remember, to know anyone we want in this world. So you could know, any presidents around the world, just like 5 connections away. You could know every single entrepreneurs 5 connections away. The beauty of the world we live in right now is that we are all interconnected through apps, right? For you think about LinkedIn on the professional side, but also just all the community that build around, the conferences that you go to and events that you go to that allows you to meet people. We are all interconnected. And I highly, highly recommend that if you don't have, for example, a LinkedIn account, that after my presentation, you go on LinkedIn and you open one, create one, follow me, follow each other. Because you have to think of networks as the gateway to your next opportunity as well. I believe it is about 60% of job offers or jobs that people get are actually not found through an offer online. They are found through a networking event or through a connection that that is looking for specific talents or specific skills that you may have. So think about it, 60%. Like you have more chance to find a job by networking around than to sending resume and cover letters somewhere where you don't really know where it's going to go. So network is extremely important. And that's really the end of my presentation. At the end of the day, I would like you to think about what the impact you want to have in this world, in your life. There are so many opportunities out there. Again, when I think about what is going to be the world in 10 years from now, I have really no idea. Things seems to be evolving so quickly. There are a lot of challenges ahead of us, but with challenges again comes opportunities. And that rule of like 10 advices that I gave to you, I'm still following it. I'm still going back through that list sometimes and asking myself, am I doing that correctly? Okay. Am I failing? Okay. What am I learning? Am I networking properly, etc., etc.? And this little advice really helped me to transform myself in this world that is also transforming itself. I hope it was helpful, and I'm also, of course, happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Pierre. I think we'll just let everyone take a second just to see if they can think of any questions, and then I guess we'll just answer. You can answer them as they come in. Pierre, you can see the questions, right?
I see one. I see one question on the chat, and I see one question on the Q&A. So that's okay. If you can try to put maybe all the questions in the Q&A to centralize, and that will be easier. But I'll answer both. So the one that is on the Q&A first. Many people think entrepreneurship is risky. What do you think about starting your own business? I totally agree with you. So to even tell you the story, when I was in France, I did an entrepreneurship course that was part of the engineering degree that I was doing. And the two people that came to teach us entrepreneurship, they told us to do a business plan. And honestly, it was one of the most boring things I ever had to do. I don't think they were really inspired by what they were doing themselves, and it, didn't really excite me at that point. And I thought about the same thing. I was like, oh my God, I will never be an entrepreneur. It's way too risky. Why are people even trying this? Doesn't make sense to me. That's not for me. And this is how, I started to think originally when I was back in France. When I came to Canada and I was doing my PhD, I started to network actually with people in business and entrepreneurship. And then I went to the events where there were a lot of entrepreneurs talking about many different topics that some of them were not of interest to me and some of them were very exciting. And then I went to talk to them. I went for coffee with them. I went to, understanding a bit more what they were doing, and did they find it was risky? And many of them will tell you, yeah, in many cases it is risky. But it doesn't stop us from doing what we are doing, because that risk taking, it is a calculated risk. The more you get familiar with something that you didn't know before, and the more you realize that it's not that risky. There are tools around there, there are resources that you can tap into to mitigate the risk and make sure that you can still have an impact. When you think about many new innovations these days in the medical field, but also in many other applications, they are risky. It was risky to send the first rocket from Tesla into space. It was risky to put the first implant in someone else's head. It was risky even to build the first car and replace horses with cars, right? When you think about it, but people didn't stop them. It didn't stop them because the impact and the vision that they had, they knew could fundamentally change the world and make it a better place. And when it's those things that are into play, I think you are willing to accept a bit of risk because it's worth it. But again, calculated risk. And to understand what those calculated risks are, go back to resources, go to entrepreneurship centers at different universities, and go to this entrepreneurship event where you can talk to entrepreneurs, and so they can guide you on what you should be doing next and what you should probably not focus on, etc. It's all about learning, and the more you know something and learn about something, the less it looks risky. I'm just like add another example because I think it's always an easy one. Think about when you didn't know maybe how to bike before, and you see people on bike and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to jump on a bike and I'm gonna have to fall from that bike and maybe I'm gonna scratch my knee and etc. Well, it's kind of risky, but eventually you did it because you wanted to learn how to bike. Same thing, right? Entrepreneurship is really learning how to ride that journey. Now I'm gonna answer the question that is on the chat. What inspired you to pursue neuroscience? Well, another good questions. So to me, neuroscience, is this thing where I don't even know really, and I don't think that by the end of the century, we're still gonna really understand the brain perfectly. We are making so many progresses, but there's still so much we need to understand. And in my opinion, I'm someone that needs to always get challenged. I'm someone who like to discover new things. By understanding neuroscience, not only I had these roots in front of me to try to understand how we could control machine maybe with our thoughts or better do neurostimulation to treat patients, but I also have a field in front of me where there were still so many questions, there are still so many questions that needs answers so we can help patients. And for me, because it feels like a bit of an infinite challenge, it's actually something that excites me. It's actually something that I feel is really, as I mentioned in the presentation, the next frontier that we need to unlock to really have the impact we want to have with our technologies.
Okay, I think we'll give questions like a couple more seconds to come in, and then if there aren't any, we can call it here. I think that's everything. Oh, no, we just got a question.
Is there something that you wish you had done sooner in terms of entrepreneurship? That's a very good question again. Yeah, so many things. Like this is the thing where sometimes fields that are launching their first company, and we always laugh. We always tell ourselves, "Oh my God, if we had to do it again, it would be so much easier because we went through so many hurdles and we have learned so much that now we know how to do it much better and much quicker." So when you ask, is there something that you wish you had done sooner? It's hard sometimes because until you actually go through that process, you don't really know what you don't know, right? Um, I think what I think I had done sooner was maybe this networking component. I'm presenting in front of you today, and many people think that I'm an extrovert, for example, but I'm actually a pretty big introvert. I just have learned how to work with my extrovert side more because I need to. I need to for the work that I'm doing, and I had to learn how to do that. I also know that, after giving a presentation like this one or socializing with a lot of people at events, I also need my quiet time after, and I protect my time. I need it because this is how I recharge. And so I think one of the things that I would have liked to learn earlier or done earlier is actually to have that network and to understand that I need to be sometimes a bit more extrovert to build the right connection, build bridge and connection with multiple people, and then those connection then makes my life much easier sometimes in terms of, oh, I need those resources to build that thing. Oh, I know where to ask to now. Or, oh, I need that next job opportunity to get where I want. I know who to ask in order to go toward that direction. Unfortunately, I think when I was still doing my engineering degree back in France, and even at the very beginning of my PhD in Canada, I didn't really have that sense of connecting enough with people. So this is why I always insist, network, 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 because it is how you're gonna get most of your job opportunities and the next things that you're gonna be doing in life. You're gonna learn them often from those networks that kind of like put some seed or hints in your head, and that are gonna be making you curious and exploring field that then you may be very passionate about.
Okay, I think that's everything. So thank you so much for coming to speak, Pierre. That was really, really helpful, especially for, I think, the people who are interested in maybe the more up and coming field that is health tech, and especially like what it looks like to actually start working in these areas. So yeah, thank you so much for speaking today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And to everyone, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send an email at Neuraura on our website. There's a contact details. If you have any follow-up questions, we will be more than happy to answer them.